Hello, everybody, and welcome. My name is Beri Meric. I'm co-founder and CEO at Ivy and the chapter chair of YPO Metro New York. And it is my absolute pleasure to introduce all of you today to Susan McPherson. Susan, welcome. How are you today?
I am wonderful, Beri. Thank you. I'm a little teary-eyed after hearing that song.
Well, the song was beautiful. Great song choice. Really appreciate it. And really appreciate you being here with us today. We're going to be discussing the lost art of connecting and how we can all better master building meaningful business relationships. Susan is a truly ideal guide when it comes to this particular topic. She's a serial connector, a seasoned communicator, and the founder and CEO of the renowned firm McPherson Strategies. She has over 25 years of experience, ranging from marketing to PR to sustainability communications, and she speaks and contributes at top conferences and contributes to amazing publications around the world. She also has a deep dedication to social impact, and we had a lot in common as we were catching up right before going live today. And she just this week launched her new book, which is called The Lost Art of Connecting, that I highly recommend everyone to check out. And we get 60 minutes with her today to learn what are the most actionable next steps we could be taking to supercharge how we connect, how deeply we can connect, and how to make those connections transformative. So, Susan, thank you again for being here. And to help us kick off, I want to just start by asking you, what was that vision that drove you to writing this particular book, right? There's thousands of books getting published every month. What did you see as like the gap in the market? And if everybody read this book and embraced it, what would that world look like? What's your vision?
Well, that's a big question. And first, I want to say thank you, Beri, and thank you to Ivy, and thank you to the YPO community for inviting me to participate today. And I have to say, it's quite an honor, and what an incredibly talented and accomplished community that you all have gathered. I started the process, which for those of us in the audience who've written books, it's a very long slog, but it was about 4 years ago. And it really grew out of not only hundreds and hundreds of people saying to me, Susan, you're so good at connecting people. When are you going to write a book? And one of the things that had been gnawing at me, and probably to many of you, was this over reliance on technology, this way we were measuring our success in terms of connection and networking by the number of clicks and likes and followers, rather than actually the true meaningful relationships that make things happen in our lives and make impact. So I put forth my proposal, 3 or 4 years later, and I got the yes, and I started to write in February of 2020. And then March happened, and we all know what happened. And guess what? Then all we had were clicks and likes and followers and things like this. So in some ways, my thesis was kind of like, oh no, what do I do? However, over this past year, while writing the book, and thankfully during the beginning and several months in, it's not like we knew we were going to be sequestered in this, in our homes or wherever we had to quarantine. We did not have the clue that it was going to be a year. But over the term of writing, I interviewed more than 30 leaders who had made building deep, meaningful connections, building community as part of their career success. And that, first of all, gave me such a renewed sense. Also, because it was always the elephant in the room during the pandemic in terms of this loneliness that so many of us were feeling, it became part of the conversation. And it also helped me understand how we could get better at the technology that we were using and not just use it for clicks and likes. So fast forward to today. And I have to be honest with you, as you will probably get to know over the next hour, I'm not an introvert. Although in the book, there's lots of tips and tricks for building community and connection when you are an introvert. But it's been the loneliest time in my life because I don't have children, I don't have a partner, and I don't have parents. So I have been totally alone. But I think one of the number one lessons that I've learned putting this book together, as well as those who have participated in the book writing and those who have read it, nothing matters more than those deep, meaningful relationships. And not just in our personal life, but in our professional life. the relationships that we make in our 20s, in our 30s, in our 40s, that literally last the test of time and keep showing up in a variety of ways.
Thank you so much, Susan. Congrats again, getting the book done on such a meaningful, important topic, and really excited to learn with you. And like you said, I mean, there is, what's more important than that? Like, if you really think about it, those deep relationships really do influence everything, for sure in our personal lives, but also oftentimes in our organizations and our businesses, right? In the end, so much comes down to that deep connection, deep trust, and being there for each other. So share with us, I mean, given the fact that most of us intuitively know that connections are important, deep connections are important, what are the biggest mistakes that people keep making, regardless of how smart they are, how thoughtful they are? What are the mistakes? What are also the myths maybe they believe in when it comes to connections and what they're all about? So give us an idea of that, so that maybe all of us have a bit of a mirror up to our face, so we can see, okay, where we might be screwing this up a little bit, and then we'll dive in from there.
I think it's important to mention, given there are so many business leaders in this audience and in your community, one of the impetuses that also pushed me over the edge to write this book was, I looked back at the last 8 years or 7 years at the time of my company's revenues. My company was founded in 2013 at the grand young age of 48 when I started it, and 98% of our revenues have been inbound. And a light bulb went off in my head, because that came from the relationships I seeded in my 20s and 30s. And it wasn't like when I was in my 20s and 30s, meeting people, volunteering, getting involved in public service organizations in the cities I lived. It wasn't like I was thinking, you know what, I'm going to come back to you in 30 years and I'm going to call you and try to sell you my business. So I think the lesson learned there is, these types of things actually carry forward. And an interesting tidbit I learned, which I think is fascinating, is people that you will never meet actually affect you professionally. So everyone you meet is a conduit to other people. So I think I just love that. And when you start to go down that rabbit hole, it's really, really interesting. So some of the I think, I don't want to call them mistakes, because they're error. They're just misjudgments. I want to decipher between networking and connecting. Okay. I am not against networking whatsoever. It is a necessary evil. And even though this past year we have not gone to the proverbial rubber chicken dinners, or, those cocktail parties with the lukewarm hors d'oeuvres, etc., we will be eventually going back. And this is very different than that. Okay. This is not about shaking hands with 50 people, exchanging cards, connecting on LinkedIn, and never having a conversation again. This is actually about really engaging in conversations, listening with utmost intent. And then when you are asking the right questions, you actually find out enough about that other person that you then have the tools to handle the follow-up. So I think number one, and I learned this through all sorts of research, and I kind of already knew it, but it was a slap in the face to really see in print, and that is how woefully bad we are at listening. And in this past year, have gotten even worse. And I can't blame people, but when we are in this proverbial video rooms, whether it's a Zoom room or a Microsoft Teams room or whatever the technology at choice or at hand is, we are distracted, right? We have our email, we have our text, we have Twitter, we have LinkedIn, we have things binging, buzzing, everything. So it's very easy to kind of not listen to someone. And in fact, if there's people in the audience right now who are partially listening, I understand. But the thing is we can't actually follow through and be of service, be of help, become dependable and trustworthy if we don't listen to people when they are talking to us. So I think, one, making sure we understand the difference between networking, building meaningful connections. 2, listening. And the third very important lesson is to pivot. And this is a bigger thing. This isn't something you would just turn the light bulb on, but create a mindset that you are not leading when you walk into a room, whether it's a virtual room or a real live dinner party. Switch your mindset from the traditional, what can I get out of this, to what can I give? How can I be of help? How can I be of service? And I want to wrap that though with one important note. It is not about putting yourself second or putting yourself last or not putting the oxygen mask on first. It is very much this notion that if you help others, the help will come back to you. So you're actually helping yourself. I'm going to take a sip of water.
Excellent. Thank you, Susan. So basically, just in summary, my key takeaways here is like, networking is fun, but when it's connecting, that means something quite different. And it requires, for example, being really good at listening and acting on that, what you're hearing in a particular way. And also having this mindset of, what I can do for others as like the true way to build that relationship, as opposed to really focusing on what do I need out of this. So thank you for giving us like the kind of the pitfalls. Now let's switch to the actual framework that you've developed and crystallized in this book. If you had to really narrow it down to the fewest number of key ingredients, what in your view leads to transformative, lasting connections, the connections that make the biggest difference? If you give us like a bird's eye view of what those ingredients are, and then we'll take them in turn to hear from you specifically, well, how do we then incorporate those ingredients in each area of our life to really, move our connection game to the next level?
Well, the methodology I delve into in the book, and the book is divided into 3 parts, is gather, ask, do. Gather is where you have almost an inflection point where you, one, figure out what is a meaningful connection or relationship to you, because what a meaningful relationship to me might be very different than what it is to Beri. Okay. So that's 1. 2, it's when you do the actual soul searching to find out what it is that only you have to offer the world. And I call it your chief differentiating factor or your secret sauce. And I'm often told by individuals who are just out of college or in their early 20s, or even people who are heading towards retirement, that I don't have any. Well, I beg to differ, and we can get into that. But once you have that, you also need to think about what is the community you want to surround yourself with, and how best do you ensure that that community doesn't look just like you, sound just like you, walk just like you. The next phase is the ask phase. And when we hear ask phase, we immediately think of asking for what we need and what we want. And I'm a big believer, and we always have to step up and voice for our own needs and desires. But in the book and in this methodology, what I spend a lot of pages on is the art of the ask, so that you can ask the right questions of others to get to the meaningful details in their lives that you then can translate into the do. And the do is when you can follow through based on asking the right questions and be that dependable, reliable, trustworthy individual, and be able to either help that person, connect that person, introduce that person. And it doesn't have to be done the next day or the next month or even the next year. So this is a methodology that you can be utilizing throughout your life. But I will say it is especially important right now when we are on this cusp of coming back into some sense of normalcy. It is a perfect time to actually do a bit of navel gazing and look at your community and think about, I've been out of touch with John, Joe Smith, whoever, and who do I want to reconnect with, and how do I want to go about that?
Brilliant. Susan, thank you. So we've got this really compelling framework, gather, ask, and do. So let's start with the first one. So you really narrowed it down to the 3 questions we all need to deeply reflect on. So what's a meaningful connection for us? What's our secret sauce that we have to offer to the world? And what's the community we want around us? Share with us what is like the most effective way in which someone could reflect on these questions and answer them, and what format does the answer take? So like I know that you're also a communications expert. How do you because these are existential questions that most people kind of think they know, but they haven't really crystallized. What would you say is the best way to gather it all together?
It is so extraordinary and individually based, right? But I mean, use, however you collect your contacts, okay? Whether it's in, LinkedIn, whether it's in your, iPhone, it's a really good time to kind of cull through that and see, right? Do the exercise. Like how How much does your community look like you? How do you potentially think about expanding it? That's number one. Number two, get an old pen and paper and write down, what are the things that you actually are most proud of in your life, or that you have done, or skills that you may have. And I joke, somebody says to me, but I'm 22. What do I have to offer somebody who's, 60? And my, I say two words, TikTok. But I'm being facetious, but I think you get my point. I mean, think of all the skills, the tools, the languages you speak, all the things, the places you've been on this planet. And I would actually go so far as writing it down. Okay. I wish I could give you some kind of magic formula. I think it's also really important at the gather phase to give your sense of, what do you want to accomplish in the next 4 years, or 4 months, or 4 weeks, and put that down. What is it? Are you looking to, get your startup funded? Are you looking for a new job? Are you looking for a new spouse? These are things to actually be, crystal clear on. And like I said, this next few months are going to be pivotal, because we are going back to some sense of normalcy. What that normalcy will be, I can't begin to guess. But this kind of transition period to me seems like a very good time to do this type of exercise. Does that answer your question, Beri?
Yeah, it's kind of binary, right? For everybody who's listening, whether you're listening live or you're recording later, you either have this written down or you don't, right? So if you don't have it, I think an exercise, for the upcoming weekend is to really have this intention, this crystallization. And I think, at a high level, this could even fit onto a page. So what are the critical things to accomplish in the coming time periods? What's a meaningful connection to your secret sauce, and who do you want around you? Just to put you to the test a little, Susan, could you tell us your answers to these questions just in a nutshell, so people get an idea of how one person frames these?
Sure. Well, my secret sauce is my ability to connect people. And I will tell you, I even know Kevin Bacon. I've been to his house. And that's entirely the truth. So, but honestly, it took me, this was not easy for me. And I think as women inherently are bad bragging and owning what we are good at. And it took me probably to my mid 40s. And I'll tell you a really funny story. In 2008, I went away with 7 girlfriends up to for those of you in the Northeast, we rented a house in the Catskills. So this was pre-Airbnb, beautiful house. But our goal that weekend was to come up with our proverbial elevator speech. In other words, who were we if we met somebody in an elevator? And it was that weekend that I finally had the guts to coin the term, I'm Susan McPherson and I'm a serial connector. And I knew we couldn't leave that weekend if we didn't come up with what our speech was. And I probably should have stayed. It was a nice house. But the first time I said it, I almost peed in my pants. I felt so foolish. It sounded ridiculous. But then 4 years later, when I'm getting on a stage and I hear myself being introduced, and they introduced Susan McPherson, a seasoned communicator and serial connector. Honestly, I still kind of want to pee in my pants because it does sound kind of funny, but it's true. So there's something to be said about stating what you know are your master skills and owning them. We learned about self-fulfilling prophecies when we were in college or in maybe even high school. There's truth to that. So I would say that is my secret sauce. And over the last several years, I have been very intentional to expand my network, my community, because it was very much looked like me. I had most of the people that I was communicating with on a regular basis were white Caucasian women. And I will tell you, I have had a woefully hard time meeting males. I don't know where they went, but they just seem to have disappeared. So it's wonderful to be in a conversation with someone who is not of the same sex as I am. Anyhow, I digress. But no, I have been very intentional. And I think, I'm often asked, how do we do that? And we are living at a time where we have to be intentional about that. We have to get out of our bubbles. And the first step is to actually start with the people you know and be so bold to say, I need to diversify my network. And I know you are connected to these 3 people. And I would very much love an introduction to them so that I can learn more about them and how I can be helpful to them. It isn't about how can I be helpful to me. So there, that's my answer to your very specific question.
Okay, brilliant. And give us I love that. Thank you so much for sharing. And like the first question you asked us to gather an answer to was, what is a meaningful connection to you? So how would you answer that for yourself? Like, how do you define a meaningful connection?
I would have to say it's the people that keep showing up and the people that can show up past the test of time, right? That can contact me after 2 years and we're still connected. I think we all know those types of people, right? That you'd almost feel like you didn't miss a gap of time and that you are accepting because you don't have to stay in touch with people every day, every week, or every month to have that kind of relationship. And I think sometimes we think of these people as more on our friend side, but believe me, I have business colleagues that span back to the late 80s that we could go 5 years and then reconnect and not miss a beat.
Brilliant. All right. Well, Susan, thank you for sharing so deeply on many levels, what drives you and then how you've translated this to something we can all leverage. So I guess like the key point here is if we don't have this written down, and I don't, we got to get it written down. So I'm giving myself like a 1 week deadline to do this, and everybody listening, feel free to do the same.
Can I offer one suggestion? I think one of the best ways to do this, or at least, again, this is from my perspective, so take it with a grain of salt, is dictate. Talk into your phone. It's sometimes easier to do than actually physically writing. And you can do it when you're on a walk. You can do it, while you're driving. It just sometimes that way you can do free thinking. I have found that to be one of the most effective tools when I do kind of deep, like when I'm trying to go inside myself. And not want to run.
Great idea. Yeah, great idea. Great idea. It's easier to not self-edit when it's verbal as opposed to like when you're typing. And yeah, excellent. All right, moving to the next one. So the next step after we've gathered and kind of clarified our North Star of like what kind of connections we want and what are our goals. Next one is this art of the ask. So share with us, what are the most powerful questions and prompts that you found have enabled you to really enable the people you're speaking with to feel a sense of connection, but also to really go into what truly matters and away from, the weather and so forth. So share with us what have been those killer prompts.
Well, and I want to caveat it all with this works virtually as well as in human real life, whatever we're calling it, normalcy. Years ago, when I was in college, I lived in Denmark with a Danish family. I had a wonderful opportunity. And to give you an example, it's been almost 30 years, and we're still in touch. So sometimes people say I'm like Velcro because I just keep in touch. But the point of the story is my Danish parents used to say to me routinely, Americans like to fill air. And they typically, when there's no one talking, will talk about the weather. And since then, since 1985, which is the year I lived with them, I have noticed that over and over again. And I probably haven't, this past year, think of all the rooms you have been in waiting for the meeting to start. And I guarantee you, people have been talking about the weather, which takes us nowhere. We don't learn anything about anyone unless maybe we get into a deep discussion about climate science. Okay. But generally it doesn't go there. So I have found that when you have questions at the ready that are going to lead you to learn more about the other person, first of all, it takes the fear out of it. Two, when you make the conversation about them, and people tend to be a little bit more interested in talking to you as opposed to making it all about yourself. So I often think like whatever types of questions can get into the gist without being nosy, right? You're not going to ask people like deeply personal questions. But right now, when I'm in Zoom meetings with people, I will say to them, if you could go anywhere in the world when this pandemic is over, where would it be and what's first on your list? And interestingly enough, this is what Beri asked me when we were in our prep chat. And I was delighted to hear it because you learn something kind of meaningful about somebody when you can listen to their dreams or what their hopes are. Or, this year has been tough for everyone. Is there anything specific that has been very, very difficult for you that maybe I could be helpful with to help you get through this? Um, and just to give you a practical example, in my team, I have 13 employees, so we're small. But every Monday we have a team meeting, and we always have an icebreaker at the beginning of the meeting. But instead of going around the room and saying, what was your what did you watch on TV yesterday, which actually maybe sometimes that can be a good question, but it's things like, what was your favorite food as a child? Or back to that, where's that one place you want to go? Or if you could live anywhere in the world, where would it be? And these types of questions really help you, again, understand where somebody is at and where they're coming from. But I do think getting into that notion of what is challenging for you right now, if you could solve any problem in the world, what would it be? I mean, these are very, very interesting questions. And for those of you who end up reading my book, there's a chapter that gives you loads of questions that you can have at the ready.
Right, and then the whole what you were telling us before is like it's one thing to ask the questions, but then where a lot of people fail is in the also the listening,
Yeah.
and then the converting what you heard into the do, like
Yes.
the action, the follow through. So share with us a little bit about that. So let's say we ask these questions or our own versions of them. What has been kind of the thing that has helped you despite the distractions, whether it's digital or just in your head? What gets you to stay focused on the person, and what is like kind of like what's happening inside your head to convert what they're saying into like that next step?
Sure. Well, first of all, I'm a slave to taking notes. I carry a small notebook with me anywhere and everywhere, and I've done that for years. I find the writing it down actually commits it to memory. I also am not afraid to say, "Can you repeat that? I missed it," because our minds do doze off, or we do think about what we want for dinner while the person's talking. So it's really important to center back. And the other thing, the third kind of component of the methodology is the do. So the gather, the ask, the do, and like Beri just said, we can't get to the do if we don't listen to the answer to the ask. But I find the most effective way to get to the do, at least the initial part of the do, is respond as soon as humanly possible. And I realize that can't be, may not be in the offing for many. We're busy. We're on to the next thing, but I will contend that if you meet three people at an event and have three meaningful conversations, it will take you all of 5 minutes to follow up with them in an email or a text or whatever mode is most comfortable for you and perhaps the other person. But I would go so far as saying, I enjoyed our conversation and it was particularly meaningful for you to share, and respond back with something that they actually stated, because there is no greater gift that you can give others is to remind them that you not only heard them, but you saw them. And that actually doing that evening, the next day, or if you can't, 3 days later, but do it while it's still fresh, that will start this wonderful cycle of gather, ask, do. And it will put it into motion. And you will, if you do this repeatedly, will become that person who is reliable, dependable, and I think most importantly, trustworthy.
Brilliant. Thank you, Susan. So what I want to do, I mean, we started with some pitfalls and mistakes, and I want to kind of come back to, like kind of, I would say probably the elephant in the room when it comes to this topic. There are lots of people, myself included, let's say, who love meeting new people, connecting, genuinely wants to help. I mean, I would say probably everybody participating in this conversation, right? But there is almost like a correlation between, well, the people who are most into connecting and doing that the most often, having the most number of conversations, it's also quite possible that the volume of follow through and the intensity with which, like, let's say if you're really good in the moment, you're present, you're listening, you're thoughtful, you're fully there for them. But then once that interaction is over and you have this flood of other interactions and follow throughs, right? Like there's a huge difference between when you're with the person versus when you're not. So, and the way we kind of chose to focus this conversation, clearly everything you said applies just as much to our personal lives as our business lives. But just from a business or professional perspective, what are the most effective ways to like systemize this or get support with this so that, with all the best intentions of the world, like if you're doing a good job of connecting with lots of diverse people, you're going to probably become overwhelmed with like the number of follow-through opportunities. Like everything could be an opportunity and you could help in so many ways. So how have you dealt with it? And even more importantly, how do you recommend us to think through this?
Well, I have to say, it's going to be very personal to everyone because we all have the systems that we have used, whether it's email, whether it's phone, whether it's, whatever contact management system you use. So I would first say whatever you feel most comfortable with, because whatever you're most comfortable with, you're going to be much more likely to use. And I am not a technologist by training. I read recently that we are still using the same contact system that we were using in 95 when, email became, and I understand Marissa Mayer is building a new company that's going to hopefully revolutionize the way we capture connections in our phones and our computers. But until we get there, I highly advise whatever means. And I'm often asked, how do you not get overwhelmed by all the asks that happen from all the people you meet? And I have to say, the more people I meet, the more efficient I get, because then I have people to go to pass them off to. Does that make sense? And again, I also want to remind people, this is not a numbers game. This is not about meeting 5,000 people and helping 5,000 people. Okay, that first of all, it's not sustainable. It's not humanly possible. And quite frankly, it's ridiculous. It's about over time, as you meet people that you want to have in your community. And quite frankly, not everybody you want in your community, right? I mean, let's just be real, we're human. But I think it's about being mindful about who are the people that are not only that you have the capacity to support, but also how are those people going to be helpful to you in your goals? And that's why that gather portion is important. It's really kind of determining what are those goals. Okay. So I do think, from a practicality standpoint, whatever system you use to capture that kind of data from, whether, again, it could be LinkedIn, it could be your email, it could be your contact database, it could be Salesforce, whatever tool you use. Two, I am hugely a big proponent of the immediate follow-up, because if not, we get on to the next thing. And Beri, you just alluded to that. All right. But also rinse and repeat. It's okay, if maybe you didn't get to the person that next day or that next week, but if you've written it down somewhere or put it in your calendar, a month later is fine too, to respond and say, oh, it was so great meeting you last month. And I really am still been pondering over that conversation we had about the hummus in Brooklyn. I mean, I'm being silly, but I think there it is. People want to feel heard and seen.
Got it. Awesome. So I'll share. You mentioned, right, you've got a team of also 13 people. So we'd love to hear also, like, so what you're saying is use whatever system works for you, immediate follow-up. I'm trying to also think of, like, are there specific, other best practices that you've used? So for example, very recently with one of my great colleagues, Amanda, who's actually helping us run the event today, we now do, like, at the end of the day, we catch up for 15, 20 minutes, where I actually go through every conversation I've had, and we think about the next steps and everything. And obviously there's stuff that I can do directly, but there's also things that she can really help me get done faster. And that's helped me got me onto like a bit of a treadmill where, well, at the very least, I'm reflecting on every conversation I had and what the next steps are. And before that, quite frankly, it was just down to me being like super thoughtful, and that wasn't really working for me. Like I really needed that partner to help me to do that. So just curious also for all the business leaders out there that do have colleagues, teams, like, individuals who want to be helpful to them. How do you kind of think about anything like that you use that's been helpful for you? Or do you reserve a day a week to just do follow-ups? I'm just curious, or like a few hours in the morning. What else do you do to really stay on top of it?
At my company, we have something every morning called quiet time. Meetings, actual client meetings, et cetera, do not start until 11, so that everybody has from 9 to 11 to do not only the needed research that they have to do for client work, but also personal, like, reading the important, we are I run a social impact communications firm. So it's very important we stay on top of not only the news happenings, but culturally, that what is going on, what is the zeitgeist happening at the moment, and Lord knows we're living in a constantly the news cycle, etc. So that is one thing that I have found personally helpful for myself, but also the team has found to be very, very helpful. I think, and this isn't a direct answer to your question, Beri, but I think it's really important for those of you who run companies to give your employees the space to build meaningful relationships and encourage it. I learned through the research for my book that actually people become much more productive when they have richer, deeper networks for the very reason I just shared. And that is you have this kind of living, breathing CRM from which to turn to of experts that you can go to gather data, to gather information, to help your company's sales and revenues, right? I mean, it's all about, who you know. But instead of just knowing people very, what is the word? Cursive? I can't. I think you know what I'm talking about. You know people on a deeper level. So I think that gives you a little bit of practicality.
All right, brilliant. I've got one more question for you, and then we're going to go to the audience Q&A. So everybody participating live, feel free to type in any questions, insights, thoughts you might have into the Q&A box, and Susan and I will get through all of them before our time's up. Susan, my last question to you is, we did go through this, forced experiment globally around COVID, right? And a lot of people, it's been a time of reflection and so on. Though for many of us, it's not like it was ideal before COVID either, right? Before COVID, whatever, if you live in the big cities, 10 things happening every day, constant feeling of missing out on things and trying to balance loved ones and professional and all of this kind of stuff. So we had this COVID imposed scary times, time of reflection. There's going to be some level of opening up coming up. So share with us what you think is absolutely most critical to maybe avoid returning to what was really maybe not good even before COVID, the way you observed, in your relationships, how people were doing things. So what are the key don't do's, and then what are the key things to double down on as the world opens up? So just to, again, to not go overboard and get, sucked in every direction while still, cultivating the relationships we always wanted to.
Well, first of all, we have a unique opportunity for a real do-over, okay? And I can honestly say in my 56 years, I've never had that opportunity, right? So it is a good time to be very intentional and think about how do we go forward and really think about our relationships. And I have to say over this last year, I mean, there have been many lessons, right? I mean, I can't even begin. There'll be books written and movies and everything for years talking about the lessons learned. But I think one thing we can all collectively agree is the loss of human connection this past year has been devastating for millions. Maybe not as much for people who are extraordinarily introverted, but I think even for them. And I think that lesson is going to be carried forward for many years. We don't want to go back to a place where we can't actually have meaningful in-person real conversations. So I think all of us have been guilty of that time when we're talking to somebody and we're looking at our email and being like, yeah. And my hope and my dream is we're going to be less likely to do that going forward. And we're actually going to be conversing. Maybe I'm overly optimistic, but after this year, I can tell you that I am committed to that. And I hope that you will also be.
Absolutely. That's a great note there. Thank you, Susan. One question I just got is all around, what about the connections and the conversations that, maybe the vibe is not your tribe. Maybe this person isn't somebody that you can truly help and so on, but you still never want to be, you don't want to leave a bad taste in anyone's mouth. So how do you deal with the connections and the relationships? Either existing ones or new ones where you just feel okay, this is not going to be the one. How do you deal with that so that people don't feel also strung along?
There is no easy way. I mean, I'm going to be honest with you, and there will always be people that you have a conversation with that you're like, oh my God, no. And then there's also going to be people that you've known for years that you also realize, there isn't that connection anymore. I'm a big believer in being direct. And maybe that has come with age. But I also think you're doing a service to the other person if you don't string them along or ghost them or all the things. I will also say is the more people we get to know in our lifetimes, we also can refer people. And that's a gift as well. So maybe if you can't be helpful, you may know someone who can. And I'm a big believer in introductions, but I always ask first. Um, and again, that is a lesson learned, and it's out of respect for others. But I do fervently believe there is nothing wrong with saying either one, I don't have the means personally to help you right now, but I'm going to do some digging to see if I know somebody else. And if you say that and then you can't find somebody, do the person the decency of following up and let them know. Okay. No matter if that person is, a senior executive or a new employee at your company. I think that we as humans deserve to be that respectful to others.
Awesome. Thank you, Susan. Another question that I just got pinged is around how do you remind yourself, when you're getting distracted or when you're not fully there? Is there a practice you use or a question you ask your own self to get yourself back onto track to really give the person you're with your best?
And I screw up. I'm, believe me, I screw up a lot. I will say, again, I think I mentioned earlier, I take notes. I have a notebook that I write down everything I need to make sure I do. But I also, when I am talking to people, like even just talking to you right now, Beri, I mean, sometimes my head's going off. I haven't eaten today, so I'm already starting to think about, what am I going to eat? But then I realize, well, first of all, there's 89 people sitting in your audience, so I kind of have to pay attention. But we all have that. We all have monkeys in our brain, and I have one monkey that I really listen to, and that monkey is telling me to pay attention. So I mean, part of it is however you can train your brain, and it is a misnomer that when we're in these Zoom chats that we're actually having eye contact with one another. So I do believe once we are back out into the real world, it'll be a lot easier to actually not start thinking about lunch when I'm talking to people. And please, that was not, I hope there was no disrespect taken.
Of course, not at all, not at all. Thank you for that. Next question, Susan, is from Neem Donahue. She asks, Susan, do you have any strategy about the different types of connections and relationships that you always try and have at any given time? And how has this changed over the course of your career? And she's asking as someone who's just quit corporate to grow her own business.
Well, first of all, I mean, congratulations. That is a very scary move. And I remember when I did that and I was terrified because I had had a paycheck since I was 15. And all of a sudden I was like, oh my God. And feel free, I think I put my email in the chat and feel free to reach out if I can be of any support. First of all, one of the grounding mechanisms that I have always had, even as early as my early 20s, was getting involved in nonprofit organizations. And I realize some people in the audience might gasp, like, who has time? But I have found that that has been an extraordinarily unique way to not only build my communities, but also diversify my communities and also learn new skills that I might not learn within the corporate setting. And I have to say that volunteer service over the years has probably been one of the biggest helps to me in running my own business. And also how to hire, like all those types of things that we think our corporate settings are going to provide, you can learn a lot. Also civic organizations. I mean, in the last several years, civic involvement has become much more common, and thankfully so. But I think getting involved in local political organizations, your school board, things like that. And again, I don't want to scare people with like, no, how do you find the time? Because it can be an hour once a month, but even that will help you not only build your community, but start having different people to go to ask for help.
Brilliant. Thank you so much, Susan. That was great. I do want to ask you, as we come to the final portion of our conversation, share with us like the different ways in which, I mean, you've been so insightful here, sharing all of your best practices and so on. What are the different ways in which our community can best support you, best engage with your work? What can they hope to find in the book itself beyond what we discussed? We'd love to hear that from you. And then at the end of that, if you have, any final kind of calls to action or words of wisdom for us, we'd love to hear that as well.
Well, first of all, that is such an odd question for me to get. And I have to say, this week when my book launched, it's very strange for me to be on the receiving end, because I'm always the one shining lights and asking the questions. So, Beri, that was a very lovely question, and it kind of threw me for a loop. But I would say, walking away from McPherson Strategies for a moment, which is the company I run, I serve on 3 boards, nonprofit boards. And so I would love to suggest you check out the organizations and potentially support. And if you are not in a position to support financially, that's fine. You could support through social, potentially volunteering. But one is, it's called USA for UNHCR, which is the US arm of the UN High Commission for Refugees. So supporting refugees worldwide. The second is the 19th, which is a new nonprofit newsroom working at the intersection of women and public policy, founded by the former editor-in-chief of the Texas Tribune. Amazing source of news and very current, and have done remarkable reporting about many of the issues that, as a woman, obviously I care about, but as society, we know women have inextricably taken the brunt of much of the horror of this pandemic. And then the third is the Lower East Side Girls Club, which, Beri, you actually don't live so far from. And it's a wonderful organization in New York City that serves girls between the ages of 8 and 18. And I have to say, a side note, my involvement with these organizations have broadened my skill set, my knowledge. I have been blessed with the ability to go to refugee hotspots around the world, so have learned deeply about just, first of all, how resilient refugees are everywhere. And there's actually 88 million displaced people on this planet right now that are living, breathing, brilliant people. And of course, here locally, getting to know like the Lower East Side of New York City, which is actually, believe it or not, where you have such a discrepancy of wealth like nowhere else in the United States, where you have very, very rich and very, very poor. So, and thank you, whoever is providing the links in the chat. That's wonderful. So I would say that is certainly a wonderful thing. And then my company, which is almost 8 years old, we help corporations as well as NGOs do the messaging and marketing to the audiences they want to reach, whether it's their own employees, the general public, their investors, you name it. So obviously, if anybody has 2 minutes, they can check it out. But I feel very uncomfortable selling my company over on this, where I'm supposed to be helping you all.
Brilliant, Susan. Well, thank you so much. I think, for me, I want to just end with asking you your final kind of calls to action for us, or any last word of wisdom. From my side, having heard everything you said, I think just this having a even if it's just a 1 page of like those questions that we got to answer, like what are the connections we want in our lives, what we want that to look like, how does that correlate to our goals? I think that's a super important activity. And then this very last thing you mentioned is, what more can we be involved with at a deeper level, right? So it's not just about like meeting lots of people all the time, but like sometimes joining organizations outside of our own to get involved with a totally different circle, to expand our horizons, both in terms of knowledge and learning, but also in terms of like the types of people we're connecting with. So those are the 2 key takeaways for me from today, above and beyond all the other amazing things that you shared. I would love to hear from you if you have any final thoughts or encouragement that you have for us, how you'd like us to kind of jump into the rest of our lives from this moment onwards. We'd love to hear it.
Well, thank you. And what an amazing opportunity this was. Thank you. I am truly grateful. A couple of things. I want to reiterate that this is a time like none other, and we really have a do-over opportunity. So I would be joyed and thrilled if you tried some of these methods I suggested. And I'd love your feedback, of course. And if I can leave you with one thought that I was so actually surprised with, but those of us who build deeper, more meaningful relationships throughout our lives will live longer. Studies show, research shows. So if I could ever think of a reason to do it, that comes to mind.
Brilliant, Susan. Thank you so much. I think this was such a powerful reminder for all of us, a great way for us to recalibrate with what truly matters. So grateful for you being here, grateful to you for putting this all into this wonderful book that I hope everybody has a chance to check out, and really excited to meet you in person soon. So thank you again for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Beri. It was wonderful.
Absolutely. See you again soon, Susan. And thank you everybody for joining us. Excited for the next time. Be well and take care. See you.